In this pod-slice summary of the Full Send podcast, Kyle Forgeard had a meaningful conversation with guest Vivek Ramaswamy, discussing different aspects of politics and the latter's run for the presidency. Ramaswamy reflected on the unexpected surge in popularity he experienced after participating in debates, stating that 6 months prior, he was relatively unknown. He discussed how he transitioned from a non-public figure, a businessman and entrepreneur, into a political candidate. Ramaswamy provided insights into his previous work as a CEO of a biotech company he founded and how he built an asset manager to compete with giants like BlackRock and Vanguard. Eventually, he began authoring books. He confessed that when he decided to run for the presidency, his chances were considered laughable by many, but he was confident that the country needed a new vision of what it stood for. At the time of the podcast, he was ranking second to third in most major national polls, a significant leap from his initial standings. Discussing the inevitable dirtiness of politics, Ramaswamy revealed how suddenly everyone paid attention to him. He also brought up the pressures that come with gaining more attention, like outside interests trying to influence policies by offering financial support. He further explained the workings of political funding, noting how super PACs spend significantly more money in the campaign than individual funders, often swaying politicians' behavior to suit their interests. Ramaswamy prides himself on refusing to play that game and using his own money, around $156 million, for his campaign instead. He considers this freedom from dependence one of his strengths, likening other politicians dependent on super PAC funds to puppets. He described the current election funding system as broken and explained his ambition to change it, believing this can only be accomplished by partaking in the system first, then altering its structure once in office. He also spoke on notable policy stances, such as ending the war in Ukraine, labeling the anti-fossil fuel agenda as a hoax, and a controversial pledge to pardon Trump, which he claimed lost him prospective donors. Finally, Ramaswamy expressed his commitment to closing the gap between what people say privately and publicly in politics. He regarded narrowing this gap as critical to the country's health and emphasized that fear hinders this, encouraging more people to speak with courage and honesty. He believes that through this campaign, they are inching closer to closing that gap. He closed out the portion by discussing his plans for election integrity if he did get into office, including implementing a single voting day as a national holiday, paper ballots, and government-issued voter IDs, but he acknowledges that these changes can only occur once he is in office, and not in the forthcoming elections. Ramaswamy discusses his stance on America First, noting it should be bigger than any one individual and should belong to the people of the country. He asserts his belief in the necessity of national unity to move the country forward. He also emphasizes that unity does not mean compromising with radical ideals that unite everyone, such as the freedom of speech. The guest also discusses his belief in restoring trust in government for young people who have grown up in a system that has frequently lied to them. In this campaign, he doesn't differentiate between Republicans and Democrats. He believes that if one agrees with the basic principles that unite them as U.S. citizens, they're on the same side. He mentions principles such as meritocracy, free speech, the pursuit of excellence, and the rule of law. The guest insists that they can debate matters like corporate tax rates, but on the basics, most people agree. The guest acknowledges his strong relationship with Trump and agrees with most of his policies. Still, inevitably, he believes taking those policies to the next level and reuniting the country will require a different approach. He emphasizes that it will take someone from outside, as it feels nearly impossible to unite the divided country. However, he maintains optimism that real leaders can harness the energy in a positive direction. Ramaswamy suggests that everyone needs to start speaking openly to overcome the division caused by fear. He believes there is a consensus among most people about certain basic values, despite the controversy surrounding them in modern media. Furthermore, he encourages people to question the narrative of division and encourages open dialogue. Finally, he brings up some policies he disagreed with Trump about, like the border wall, which he considers insufficient. Ramaswamy also disagrees with Trump's tactics with the Department of Education. He believes these agencies need to be shut down rather than reformed. Despite his disagreements with Trump, Ramaswamy is committed to defending Trump's presidency against what he considers politicized and unfounded attacks. The guest concludes this portion by contending that the need to aspire toward excellence transcends any individual presidency or policy agenda. He firmly believes that the America First ethos can lay the groundwork for a forward-thinking, inclusive roadmap for the country. Delving into the conversation, the host and Ramaswamy continue discussing the meaning of an American, referring to how newer generations may struggle to answer this question due to the current ideological and political climate. He believes the goal should be to return to core American principles, hard work, self-commitment, dedication, and freedom of speech. Later, Ramaswamy talks about transforming the federal bureaucracy, suggesting that it needs a major restructuring rather than incremental changes. He proposes significant layoffs in federal agencies and their bureaus, including such prominent organizations as the FBI, IRS, ATF, CDC, Department of Education, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. His declared aim is to reduce directories and regulations he views as bloated or inefficient, arguing that many of them are corrupted by power or political agenda. He further claims that the Department of Education, for instance, is imposing its ideologies on schools through funding conditions. Schools, needing said funding, often oblige despite parental discontent, stoking currently heated debates around school curricula, such as those including gender studies or racial equity programs. Ramaswamy identifies the supposed foes as, in his view, not elected officials, but an entrenched bureaucracy or deep state. Believing that these entities are misguided in their actions, he sees a requirement for radical change, citing the U.S. Revolution's principles as a guide. He puts forth that a new leader representing a generation with its best days ahead is the best bet for addressing these systemic issues. This conversation between Kyle Forgeard and Ramaswamy provides insights into the latter's vision for how to rekindle the spirit and values of the American ethos. It emphasizes his belief in hard work, dedication, free speech, and the removal of entrenched bureaucracy to lead the country towards its best future. Despite the disagreements he identifies, Ramaswamy makes a case for an America where citizens understand and are proud of what it means to be an American. This portion of the podcast elaborates on several contentious debates, delving deeper into the concepts of sexual orientation, gender fluidity, and climate change. Host Kyle Forgeard engages with guest Vivek Ramaswamy on these ideas, beginning with the assertion that while the LGBTQIA+ movement claims sexual orientation is determined at birth, it also argues one's biological sex can be fluid. The guest notes a contradiction in this stance, remarking that there is no scientific evidence of a gay gene. Meanwhile, sex chromosomes definitively determine biological sex. The discussion then moves on to the tensions between different groups within the LGBTQIA+ community specifically, noting how some gay individuals are unsettled with being categorized alongside trans individuals. Ramaswamy attributes this to an overarching attempt at creating societal division through lumping diverse entities into broad categories. Switching gears, the dialogue then tackles the topic of climate change. The contradiction Ramaswamy perceives here relates to the dichotomy of the climate movement's call for reduced carbon emissions, juxtaposed with an opposition to nuclear energy, a form of carbon-free energy. He claims this paradox stems from a global equity agenda, where the aim is to allow the rest of the world, particularly China, to catch up to the United States. Climate change, according to Ramaswamy, is the verbiage being used as a means to this end, adding that lobbyists for clean energy are promoting this under the guise of lobbying against nuclear power to maintain a vested interest. The guest also imparts his dissent towards the general perception of climate change, questioning its primary cause, the assertion of its potentially detrimental impacts, and whether human intervention can reverse it. An underlying theme throughout his discourse is a skepticism towards mainstream narratives and policymaking, substantiating his arguments with historical facts and statistics to highlight inconsistencies. Now turning towards societal responses to climate change, the conversation refers to present-day Europe, where people are dying due to lack of widely available air conditioning facilities during unusually hot summers. Ironically, as cooling systems are seen as contributing to climate change, Ramaswamy advocates for human adaptability and innovation to combat climate change, as opposed to attempting to alter the environment. In conclusion, though not prompting an end to the discussion, the guest deems the current political narrative around climate change as a lens through which to exercise control. According to him, the real immediate threat resides in the potential of nuclear war, a view implicating the sitting U.S. president of inaction. However, in the current global political game, implicating China as the main beneficiary of Western world's climate policies, he emphasizes that the climate change issue might be used as an advantageous tool by certain powers, a medium through which to exert influence over the political landscape. The conversation on the podcast shifts gears towards international politics, where Ramaswamy asserts the U.S. is under a more subtle form of warfare instigated by China. He argues that China uses economic and cultural weapons to deride and undermine the United States. As support for this claim, Ramaswamy mentions BlackRock's investment policies, asserting that while they advocate for emission caps and environmental consciousness in the U.S., they don't impose similar restrictions on Chinese companies they invest in. Ramaswamy describes China's activities as a form of warfare that exploits the West's dependence on them. He brings attention to instances of Chinese influence or control that go unnoticed, such as China's supply of synthetic materials to Mexican drug cartels to produce fentanyl. He also mentions China's strategy of putting American CEOs in a bind to gain access to the highly coveted Chinese market. Taking the conversation further, Ramaswamy opines that the U.S. is sleepwalking into another world war, primarily citing the Ukraine-Russia conflict. He pushes for a resolution that safeguards Ukraine's sovereignty and disbands the Russia-China allyship. According to Ramaswamy, by reopening economic relations with Russia, the United States could potentially weaken China's standing, as Russia would no longer need to rely solely on China. Moreover, Ramaswamy expresses his distrust towards Putin, however, sees the potential of striking a deal in both countries' interests. To avoid a catastrophic war, he suggests that reassessing relationships with Japan, South Korea, and India, as well as reevaluating production policies in favor of the United States, could be beneficial. Lastly, Ramaswamy posits that many parties involved from the U.S. side are influenced by vested interests and hence can't make objective decisions. For instance, military contractors who profit from wars are more likely to support them. He further argues that the current fixation with projecting power against Russia is misguided, and people need to realize that the USSR no longer exists and that China poses a greater threat. The conclusion from Ramaswamy's standpoint is that an outsider perspective is needed to rethink the political strategies and alliances in question. In this part of the podcast, the host, Kyle Forgeard, explores deeper into Ramaswamy's motivation and political challenges. Notably, Forgeard raises the issue about how he plans to handle influential world leaders, with Ramaswamy sharing that he wouldn't be overly excited to meet any world leaders but would remain focused in any interaction. He states that his main aim would be to define and defend U.S. national interests, irrespective of who he's negotiating with. Interestingly, Ramaswamy portrays distinct views on China's leader Xi Jinping, arguing that his background forms a paradoxical backdrop to his enforcement of communist ideals. He reasons that understanding such complexities is valuable in cross-table discussions. Nonetheless, Ramaswamy emphasizes that his primary role as president would be the protection of American citizen interests, stating that the establishment of precise and equally beneficial stances would be a major element to avoid war and misunderstandings. Ramaswamy also provides some surprising takes, one being his comparison of the deep state in the government to deep corporates in the private sector. Citing the incident of a tennis player unfollowing him under his agent's advice, he argues that it's the managerial or middle management class which controls the narrative in both the government and the corporate sector, making them the ones that should be questioned. As the conversation shifts towards internal politics, Forgeard questions how Ramaswamy intends to challenge Trump's robust support within the Republican Party. Ramaswamy, in a calculated response, commends Trump's work as president, yet asserts that he can take the America First agenda further while uniting America in a way Trump couldn't. He makes it clear that he doesn't plan on attacking Trump to gain popularity, but by simply speaking his truth and sharing his strategies for the country. His ambition is to make every American aware of who he is and what he stands for. Ramaswamy demonstrates a distinct tone of altruism and genuine commitment as the conversation continues with host Kyle Forgeard. When discussing the potential grandiosity of the presidency and accompanying perks such as Air Force One, Ramaswamy humbly admits that these benefits wouldn't significantly elevate his lifestyle. Instead, he insists that his drive to run for office is driven by a sense of duty to give back to the nation that has given him immense opportunities. He unambiguously distances himself from the idea of financial gains or personal glory tied to the presidency. Ramaswamy's political strategy is anchored on honesty. He emphasizes speaking the truth, letting the populace decide, and building trust over time. His campaign is off to a promising start, with 40% of his donors being first-time contributors to the GOP. Irrespective of political affiliations or demographics, he extends his arms to all who stand for pro-American values, a testament to his idea of a comprehensive, inclusive political movement. Speaking about upcoming debates with fellow Republican candidates, including possibly Trump, Ramaswamy seems unperturbed. He believes that his stance and agenda will stand firm, irrespective of who shows up. His primary focus remains on advocating for and championing his cause, viewing the debates more as an opportunity than a challenge. Forgeard commends Ramaswamy's fresh perspective and his ability to critically examine the political system from an external viewpoint. Ramaswamy's commitment to maintaining sincerity and openness in his approach to politics is recognized and applauded by the host. The conversation ends on a resonant note of mutual respect, with Forgeard expressing his eagerness to see where Ramaswamy's journey will lead. Check out the full podcast by clicking the link in the description below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for listening to this podcast summary episode of the Pod Slice.